Welcome to the Idaho Falls Community Luncheon. I'm your host, Dana Kirkham. Thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with us today. We are living in extraordinary times, and our lives are considerably different today than they were 3 weeks ago. But one of the upsides to this is how the community has come together, and this online luncheon series is a perfect example of this. This is a partnership between the Idaho Falls Rotary Club, the Greater Idaho Falls Chamber of Commerce, the Civitan Club of Idaho Falls, and the City of Idaho Falls City Club. This program is made possible by IE Productions. They really have been wonderful, and they have given so much of their time and resources to make this happen. And so we just really want to give a shout out to them and say thank you. This also has maybe tested our technology and what we're capable of doing. And so we would say to all of you that there may be, for some of you, a small lag during this live feed, but that will be corrected in the playback, so please be patient with us. You can view this program live right now, or you can tune in later and find it on YouTube at the IE Productions channel. This week, I am actually representing the City Club of Idaho Falls, and this gives me a unique opportunity to introduce the club to you for some of you who maybe are not otherwise affiliated with it. The City Club of Idaho Falls exists to sponsor and promote civil dialogue and discourse about matters of public interest. We strive to do so in a nonpartisan and in a non-sectarian manner, while encouraging broad participation by the community at large. So if you have not participated in our lecture series, I encourage you to do so now, and you can find more information about that at our webpage, ifcityclub.com. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's program, Understanding COVID-19. And specifically the COVID-19 relief programs. And with us today, we have Courtney Lydiard, who is the CEO of Ball Ventures, and Carrie Campos, who is an attorney for Ball Ventures. There's a lot of anxiety around COVID-19 in all aspects of the community. Our first responders are doing an excellent job and putting themselves right in the heat of the action, and we couldn't be more appreciative of them and their efforts. But there's also a lot of anxiety around the economy, and specifically how this will impact businesses. We're facing new and unprecedented challenges in this particular area. And it's been well publicized that the Coronavirus Relief Act, let's start that over, that the Corona Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or the CARES Act, is a $2 trillion economic relief package enacted to help individuals and businesses in the United States weather the severe financial impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. A key feature of the relief package is the creation of the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP, which will be administered by the Small Business Administration. So today, to help us better understand this, how it works, what you can expect, maybe some lessons learned, we have Ball Ventures here, and I'd like to give a small bio on each of our participants. Courtney Lydiard began his career working in U.S. Senator Orrin Hatch's office in Washington, D.C., where he served on the taxation staff and was exposed to a variety of taxation issues from the legislative perspective. He later joined and became a partner at Rudd & Company, PLLC. In July 2002, Courtney Lydiard became Chief Executive Officer of Ball Ventures, a commercial real estate and private equity company with projects across the country. In connection with Ball Ventures' private equity investments, Courtney serves on the board of directors of ARB Midstream LLC, an energy investment and development company, on the executive management committee of Sunterra Springs LLC, a healthcare services company, and on the board of directors for Texas Security Bank. Courtney attended Utah State University, go Aggies, where he received his Bachelor's of Science in Accounting and his Master's of Accountancy with an emphasis in tax. Thank you very much, Courtney, for being with us today. You are a familiar figure in our community. Carrie Campos is the Senior Legal Counsel for Ball Ventures, LLC. Carrie also serves as a board member on the Idaho Law Foundation, CASA Judicial District 7, Idaho Falls Business Assistance Corporation, Mountain View Charity, and the Idaho Falls Country Club. She has also served on the past board of Big Brothers Big Sisters of Southeast Idaho and the Idaho State Bar 7th District Association. Carrie received her, she's a double threat. She received her Juris Doctorate from Brigham Young University, a BS in accounting from Idaho State University, and she is a licensed CPA. Both very qualified to speak on today's topic. I'm going to turn the time to them for a little bit of a conversation, and then we'll come back to this format where we will address questions that you have submitted during the broadcast through Facebook Live. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. I think through my bio, pretty clear I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. But on behalf of Ball Ventures and myself, we're very appreciative of the opportunity to share a few words with everyone today. And thank IE for hosting it, and thank the Chamber, Rotary, and others for participating and getting this put together. I never thought that we would be doing something like this on Zoom, but we old guys can always learn new tricks. So, again, thanks for the opportunity. You know, at Ball Ventures, as we've looked at this crisis, really what we've decided is, hey, we're going to be leaders, not followers. We're going to get out in the community and lead and do the things necessary, whether it's supporting local businesses, whether it's enforcing, social distancing. And so when presented with this opportunity, those of you who know me well, this is probably not my most favorite thing to do, but I sat there and thought, well, leading versus following, maybe I should be uncomfortable. So this is an attempt on my behalf to be a leader, not a follower. But as we go through this unprecedented time, I think something that Ball Ventures has always been about is making a difference. We want to make a difference in our community. We want to make Idaho Falls a better place. And, I think these times, uncertain times right now, really challenge us to make a difference. I think we've tried to figure out ways that we can support each other. I think that with this war of sorts with COVID, supporting each other and learning from each other and sharing is one of the most important ways that we can get through this. Individually, we might have strengths and weaknesses, but I know collectively we're very, very strong as a community. So one of the constant themes I think here is communication and is sharing in our communities, among our employees, businesses, because that's the way we're going to beat this thing is sticking together. There's no proprietary information. Anything that we talk about, well, you're welcome to call us. I would note, however, I am did she call you double trouble, Carrie? I'm not really sure, but I'm only single trouble and a washed up single trouble CPA. So call Carrie. But if there is ever been a time for us to support each other, support our communities, and, come together even and share information as competitors, now's the time. We're all in this together. And we've learned a lot of different things. I think the first thing that Ball Ventures has learned was really how do we work remotely? And, there was a number of companies in the community that we shared ideas and quickly then figured out how to use Zoom, Moxtra, and other tools to be able to begin business every day, if you will. And I think that's another topic for another day, but another way that we can begin to share, because as we've gone down that path, how do we have the camaraderie? How do we have the company culture? How do we have our wellness plan? How do we check in every day? How do we have the water cooler conversations? And it's certainly been a learning experience for us. But if we can be a benefit there, I'd like to volunteer that out. And Liza, actually, who's a part of today, has led a lot of that effort. So I'd encourage you to reach out to Ball Ventures and Liza or myself on that. I think understanding all the various programs is really key. I know that the SBA, the PPP loan is probably the focus of that and where we'll spend the bulk of our time today. But there is a lot of confusion, Dana, and you're 100% right about, geez, which way do we turn? Do we go left? Do we go right? Well, if I go left, can I still go right? And it's a difficult topic. So, not that, I don't know if in the 20 minutes we have enough time to give it justice, but we're going to do it our best. But being the CPA and Carrie being the CPA and attorney, here is the official fine print that we're not your tax advisor, your attorney, da 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 da. But we do want to share our expertise. The intent isn't to rely upon what we say, but it's really sharing information, and we'll continue to do so. So please reach out. However, I don't know how to do a tax return anymore, so don't rely on my advice. So with that, really Carrie is the one that's led the effort on behalf of Ball Ventures. She's done an incredible job digesting, I don't recall how many pages that the CARES Act is. She's done a phenomenal job digesting that and leading and guiding Ball Ventures through this process. We have our Director of Tax, Brian Parkinson, and our Chief Credit Officer, Neil Floyd, that three of them formed a team and have been doing this for weeks. And I think finally, maybe tomorrow night, they'll be able to get a full night's rest. So with that, Carrie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Courtney. That's a generous introduction, and I appreciate it. And Dana, I'm not going to attempt to say the whole name of the act as well. We simply refer to it as the CARES Act, which, as we all know, is a $2 trillion stimulus package to help out not only individuals, but more specifically small businesses and businesses like in our community, in our local community. Three of the main benefits that we've looked at with our committee are the employee retention credits, the economic injury disaster loans, which we shortened down to EIDL, as well as the payroll protection program, which we shortened down to PPP. So with that, I think everyone's generally familiar with these three programs. I'll touch a little bit on the credits, a little bit on the EIDL loan, and then probably spend most of our time on the payroll protection program, which is where we at Ball Ventures have found that will be deliver the most benefit to us. So, what little I do know is probably bulked up in that program. So going back to the employee retention tax credit, this credit is a tax credit that's available to all organizations. Really, you just have to either have been suspended or partially suspended because of the COVID pandemic, and you have a loss of proceeds compared to the quarters in 2009 and 2020. That credit basically looks like 50% of wages per employee up to $10,000 of wages. So it's something to look at with your accountants, but one thing that we know, and the interim rules that came out last night say, really these programs that we're going to talk about are exclusive. It's, with some exceptions, they're one or the other. So this credit, employee retention credit, is a good program and may benefit some of the companies. So we just encourage everyone to consult with their experts, accounting and legal professionals. So again, and this goes for all three of the programs we're going to talk about. The best resources are, of course, the SBA website, the U.S. Chamber website, and treasury.gov. And I think that's on the PowerPoints we have up there. So turning just quickly for another overview of the economic injury disaster loan. This program has been with the SBA for quite some time. What the CARES Act did is say, okay, now it's a disaster for everyone. We're all in this, so you don't have to have a regional disaster like a hurricane or an earthquake. The CARES Act said everyone, well, not everyone, all can qualify now for an economic injury disaster loan. And that's all small businesses, which is a little tricky, and we'll dive into that on the PPP. But a small business, of course, is less than 500 employees or less. It also applies to sole proprietors, independent contractors, private nonprofits, and, well, I think that's a pretty good list. There are some exclusions that you would need to be aware of if you're going to pursue economic injury disaster loan. I'm just going to call it EIDL because I'm going to keep tripping on that. So the EIDL is up to $2 million. And right now, one of the benefits of the EIDL is that you can apply. And the EIDL, compared to the PPP that we'll talk about later, the EIDL is applied for directly through the SBA. And you can apply today. You can get a $10,000 advance, and that advance is forgiven. You don't have to pay it back. The terms are a 30-year term, and depending on what kind of entity you are, the interest rates are up to, I think, 3.85%. So this is a loan that you establish that you have economic injury because of COVID. You qualify for the loan. It's up to $2 million. You get a $10,000 advance that's forgiven. Generally, there's no personal guarantee required and under a certain threshold for a loan amount. And then collateral just on your general business assets will be required for a loan over a certain amount. But this loan has to be paid back. So let me just scroll through my notes here. So those are kind of the two programs we looked at. Again, we at Ball Ventures have really dialed in on the payment protection program. And so before I dive into that, Courtney, any questions, or do you want to go back to either the credit or idle?
No, I don't think so. I think the real important point there is there's a lot of confusion around which one do I go with? What does it mean? I know for a while with a lot of folks were chasing the idle program, and then there's the issue of collateral, or they thought there was to be no collateral. But I think the real important point there is understanding in the way that they may disqualify you from using the PPP. So with that, let's turn to the Payment Protection Program, PPP. And I think to make a disclaimer on the front end, I know there's a lot of questions, and I think we probably end up at the end of this addressing it, but around the banks. We saw the false start. You probably saw the news from Jamie Dimon that's saying the government's not ready, et cetera, et cetera. And it turned out that, as usual, Jamie Dimon was correct and the banks weren't ready. But I think we'd like to cover that at the end, because I think it is a hot topic. There's some confusion around, is my loan approved, is it not? But let's start with maybe high level, Carrie. What is the PP program? And give us a general outline.
So the Payroll Protection Program is a new program that was enacted under the CARES Act, and it is allocated $349 billion of the $2 trillion stimulus package in SBA 100% guaranteed loans to small business employees to cover their payroll costs and some other costs that we'll talk about. So there's a cap on the amount available, and this program is only available to small businesses, which is 500 or fewer employees.
Okay. So who's eligible? Do I have to be a big business, small business? Does it matter?
Well, for the small businesses as 500 employees or less, but you can be a veterans organization. It includes nonprofits. It includes tribal business concerns, sole proprietorships, self-employed individuals, and independent contractors. So as long as you're really, what we look at are the big test is under $500, 500 employees, unless you've been specifically exempt by the CARES Act. And those two exemptions are the hospitality industry, which is the NACIS code of 72s. And if you're listed as a franchise on the SBA franchise directory, those entities do not have to apply with the 500 or less employees. But I think for us, we just dial in on how many employees you have.
So just to clarify, so I can have 2 employees, I can have 500, and I qualify. And you said there were certain businesses that are excluded.
Yes. So no, all businesses, all small businesses are included. So all small businesses, 500 employees or less. And that includes employees if you have 2 employees. You have 1 employee, if you're a self-employed individual. So you do qualify for the PPP program. The exemption, to be clear, is whether you have to count their employees for the 500 total, because it's not just one business that you have to look at. If you have multiple businesses, multiple business lines, you own interest or membership in multiple businesses, you control or manage multiple businesses, you have to look to all those businesses to come up with your 500 employee count. The only entities that don't have to do that are the hotels and the franchises.
Great, great. And I know that that's a fairly complicated definition, but affiliates, is there a threshold? Is there a, how do I determine if I'm in that affiliate group?
So as an attorney, I say just assume you're in the affiliate group. The SBA rules are very broad, and they're all encompassing. So but the general rule, I mean, I'm facetious. The general rule is if you have common ownership, so if you own 50% or more of any of multiple entities, corporations, LLCs, you would have to count those. If you control them, so there's this concept of control, even if you don't own an entity, but you have some management control, you have to include those as well. The SBA just came out with interim rules on affiliation just last night again. So this is kind of a moving target. It is a complex area. And so if you have more than one entity and you need to look at the affiliation rules for employee count, I would highly suggest you get your attorney or tax professional.
Great advice. It is definitely complicated. So what if I have a working capital line somewhere else, or I just received one because I was ahead of the curve? Does that exclude me?
Yeah. So, well, I don't know. Let me see what you're asking. One is there's typically the SBA requires can you get credit elsewhere? And normally under SBA loans, you have to establish that you cannot get working capital from any other source, including other members. That test does not apply to the PPP program. That test does not apply for the Idaho program either.
Okay. So I could have had it under the old rules, it would have kicked me out. But under these rules, I can have working capital line, whatever, receivable line, inventory line, and that's just fine.
Yes.
Okay. Because I think that's important for people to understand.
But just to reiterate, and I think the second point of maybe your question is if you already have an SBA loan for economic relief or whatever SBA loan that you may have qualified and you have one, you do have to take that into consideration. Okay,
great. So tell me, how do you calculate this? How do we go through the process? So I'm eligible. I have less than 500 employees. I qualify. I've gotten with my the best attorney there is out there because I have a few businesses. How then? Let's just focus on one business. So how do I calculate the loan amount?
Okay. Well, so you bring Brian Parkinson onto your committee. Accountants and tax guy we have, and he's been invaluable in helping us identify what goes into the payroll cost. So the loan amount itself is based on 12 months, an average month of 12 months of payroll costs. You get 2.5 times that average month. So the big question that everyone is asking, and to be honest, it's been a little bit of a moving target, is what exactly accounts for payroll costs. Those are wages and salaries, so just general compensation, payment for vacation, family leave, sick leave, employee benefits for healthcare and retirement, insurance premiums. I think I said that. So those typical things are included in the payroll cost.
Okay. So is there anything else? I want to talk about how we can use the funds. Is there anything else related to payroll costs that you want to cover?
Yeah, a few things. So there is a cap on compensation for highly compensated employees over $100,000. That the amount over 100 has to be excluded. There are some other amounts of payroll costs that have to be excluded in addition to this cap on 100. So almost every bank now has a calculator that you put in, and it's I won't say it's easy, but for the application purposes, they're going to look at you're going to look at your W-3 or your 941, and you're just going to be pulling boxes over. So.
Okay. So how can I use these funds? What can the proceeds be used on?
Okay, well, obviously the program is intended to help employers keep their employees. Okay. So the bulk of the proceeds must be used on payroll. There is. Is
that all? Is it only payroll?
You can also use it on lease and rent payments if the obligation to pay the rent was established before February 15. Interest on mortgage payments if that obligation was established before February 15th, and utilities if they were connected before February 15th. Obviously, you can see they're trying to avoid people running out and getting mortgages and entering into leases. So
the key is that February 15th, 2020 date, right? That's the key.
Right. So any interest payment on a mortgage would be, you can use the loan proceeds for that. Your rent, your lease payment, and utilities. But there is a cap on what you can use. So those three things I'll just call interest and lease and utilities. There's a cap, and it's basically 25% of what will be the forgiven amount, which we really haven't talked about, which is the best part of this program.
So I was going to offer up maybe a two-part question, which really, well, let's break it into two questions. One is, how do I go through, but automatically, is it forgivable, or is there a computation? How do I get there, and when do I make the computation?
Okay, so the loan itself, the actual loan amount is based just on payroll, an average payroll of 2.5 times that. There is a forgiveness component to this program, which makes it, I think, not lucrative. I keep using that word, and I probably shouldn't, but it makes it a beneficial program for us because as at June 30th, you have to apply for forgiveness, first of all. It's not automatic, but a portion, if not a good material portion of the loan, can and will be forgiven. You have to apply for it by June 30th. You have to establish you have actual payroll costs for 8 weeks. You have to establish actual interest payments made on your mortgage obligations, actual utility expenses, and actual rent payments. So that portion will be forgiven. And if you run the math, it's, it ends up being a significant forgiveness of the total loan amount. And the remaining loan, I think everyone's pretty familiar with this, will run at 2 years, 1% with a 6-month deferral. So
when I do the calculation, so I've got my loan, then I do the calculation. If there's something left over, then it rolls in automatically to a loan, or do I apply for that?
That rolls automatically into a loan. Okay. It is a loan, so you have to apply for the forgiveness.
Okay, all right. Is there anything else that I don't have any more questions besides moving into the banking? Any other summary statement, thought before we get into banks?
No, I don't think. I think that's a pretty high overview. I think most people are familiar with the payroll protection program. You cannot, with exception, you can't have the credit and the payroll protection. You can't do the EIDL and the payroll protection program. So with exceptions, these programs are mutually exclusive, with exceptions. So, and it probably take too long to go into those exceptions, but no, I think given that, we should just dial into maybe our personal experience.
Okay. Well, let me tee that up, and then you fill in the blanks. So, I think it's important for everybody to understand that we did start out right at the beginning, trying to figure this out. Which way do we go? Like everyone else, I think in our community, state, and country, we've started making the rounds and calling all of our institutions, and which ones had it figured out, which ones don't. I know with Ball Ventures, we definitely have a focus on supporting our local community banks, being able to support banks within the state, and then outside of that, reaching out. And so I think it was a balance for us to figure out, which way to go. Initially, the thought was, boy, we better go with these big guys. They got it all figured out. Boy, they got all the answers. And which I think proved to be that not one institution had it more figured out better than the other. maybe the large ones were, maybe they had too many attorneys because they were a little bit afraid to move for a while. And I'm going to give a big shout out to a lot of the local lenders, regional lenders, because I think that was based on relationships, and that proved out to be, I think, invaluable. But what was so we went through a strategy. We broke our loans up into several buckets to try to process them. Maybe go through the success and failures that we found. Where did we find some success? Where did we find maybe failure, roadblocks, difficulties?
Okay, I'll try to answer this without rambling too much. But we initially thought it would be in our best interest to pick a big bank and bulk our applications, because we have a significant amount of applications. And we really wanted to just go with one lender. Well, we didn't want to, that was one of the options we had. Should we go with one lender and do all of our applications? Should we put all of our eggs in one basket? So we worked with some of big lenders. And just to back up, this whole thing, the SBA PPP program went live on Friday. So this for 2 weeks. We were waiting for that program to go live, and banks couldn't process applications at the SBA until April 3rd. So we were trying to decide, okay, come April 3rd, where do we want to go? Should we go with one big bank, put all of our eggs in one basket, and do all of our applications there? Which I think we were leaning towards come Thursday evening of Friday the 3rd. And that some of the bigger banks, for whatever reason, couldn't go live on Friday. And then
is that 10 at night or 1 on Friday morning? I'm not quite sure. I don't remember.
I don't.
I know y'all were working hard.
I don't know either. But what I know is Friday, when the program went live, some of the bigger banks weren't ready to go live and weren't ready to accept our applications. And we'd also been working with smaller banks, right? Banks we have local banks that we have existing relationships with. So then we had Neil Floyd, who does great with all of the lenders, and it has contacts with so many lenders locally and on a regional level. He was probably on a call every hour with banks. And so where we landed, and then there are these non-banks that were also coming out of the woodwork, if you will, like, hey, let us process your PPP application. Even though you don't have to be a bank to process them, but you have to be SBA approved. So where we landed, I think, was the local banks with our local relationships with existing accounts proved to be very, very efficient for us. We submitted applications that were accepted and given an E-Tran number. We can talk about that in a little bit, very, very quickly. We decided to go with a non-traditional company as well that's not a bank. Simple application process on the front end. We all know we're going to do heavy lifting on the back end, but what we were trying to do is avoid the heavy lifting on the front end, and we didn't want to do all the work on the front end because it is first come, first serve. It is a limited amount. The amount is capped. Even though we feel like there's time to get in there and get in the queue, we just didn't want to take those chances. So we were hoping, let's get where the application process is simple and then do the work on the back end. So we found a non-traditional bank that we were able to send a bulk chunk of applications to. And, they're not as quick as the local banks. They're running into right now, the SBA E-Tran site is crashing today. So that's, we've kind of ended up with local banks and non-traditional banks. And then some of the big banks, I think someone pointed out earlier, maybe it was before we went live, have just backed out entirely.
So maybe, yeah. And it definitely has been difficult and confusing, but let's wrap up this section maybe by talking about something that you mentioned, because I think there's some confusion around it. You said E-Tran, and then I heard you say SBA loan number. I don't know if anybody's seen much of the money yet, but what's compare and contrast E-Tran and SBA loan number?
So here's my understanding. So I have to qualify that as Courtney always says, I'm a pencil crayon person, not very smart. But what I understand is the SBA loan number and the E-Tran number are the same thing. So the process, and I don't want to take too much time because I could probably go on forever, but when we do an Idaho loan, that goes basically straight through the SBA. You apply to the SBA. When you do a PPP, you've got to go through a bank. So we're looking at the interface between the borrower and the bank, and then also the bank and the SBA. So we submit our application to the bank. The bank then, in turn, submits a similar application to SBA. And when it hits the SBA, it is given what's called an SBA loan number or an E-Tran number. I believe they're the same thing. And what that is doing is getting you in the queue to be allocated the $340+ billion. That's really all it's doing. It doesn't mean you're approved. It doesn't mean you're going to get a check in 3 days. It just means, hey, we've got you in line and your number XYZ towards the $349 million allocation. And that's when I talked about the real work starts after that. After you get the number, the E-Tran or SBA loan number, then there are additional requirements. You have to sign a loan agreement. You have to go through a lot of traditional loan steps with your lender.
Okay. So key that you just said there, I'd like to emphasize is, so I might have an SBA loan number or an E-Tran number, but I still need loan documents with the bank.
Yes. And you still have to submit required documents your bank wants.
Okay. All right.
It requires, but your bank may require additional documentation.
Great. Any other, I think the two things left is maybe we're going to make a quick comment about other project or other programs, but anything else that you want to highlight with the PPP, anything that you see as a roadblock, any, concerns?
So just know that, getting the lender, getting into the queue, understanding that process, I think is would be an important thing to do. It is first come, first serve. You want to pick the right lender. And then the other thing that everyone needs to be aware of is that because of this process and how it's so expedited, the banks are allowed to rely on certifications from the owner for certain things that they would normally have to do their own underwriting. And the banks are now being held harmless from what the borrower is saying. So the SBA actually has direct recourse against not just the borrower, but its shareholders, members, officers, directors for fraud if you misrepresent those certifications on the application. So I just encourage everyone to read those and understand what they're saying.
Okay. All right. I think let's wrap this up before we open it to questions. I know something that comes along quite a bit is, boy, what other programs are out there? There's a lot of talk among business owners, and I know I've had a lot. You've had a lot. There's a lot of talk about there for some payment relief. I know we've had a lot of discussions with, some of our representatives in Washington, D.C. about how some of this applies to real estate payment relief. As far as I'm aware, there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of ideas that are floating out there. My personal opinion is before we see those, we're going to see a Treasury allocation of more funds to the SBA program, because I think they've realized how popular it is and necessary. But other than that additional allocation to the SBA that they might hopefully make here in the next few days to help other businesses, is there any other potential programs that you're aware of out there?
Other than possibly the 90-day commercial loan deferments, which I don't know if you touched on that or not. I mean, that's something that's being pushed by business people. I know that there's a push. This is not small business related, but there's a push to get hazard pay for our first responders, people in the medical community, and even down to the grocery store workers. So I don't know how successful that would be, but I'm not really in the know other than that.
Okay, great. And neither am I. I know that we've had a few, I've had a few phone calls about what we're seeing on the front lines and some additional thoughts that Congress may or may not have. And so I'm not aware of anything. So I think with that, that wraps up part of the program. And Dana, I think, and Carrie, very much thank you for your expertise and for everything you've done, and also to Brian Parkinson and Neil Floyd. But with that, Dana, we'll shoot it back to you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much to both Carrie and Courtney for both of your expertise and for your insight. It does just, and this whole experience is a little bit surreal, and it just makes you realize the importance of human interaction, because it makes for such kind of a strange experience. I'm in the studio by myself, and you guys, of course, are in two different locations by yourself, and it's a little bit. It just makes for a little bit of a strange exchange. So I really appreciate that you're willing to do this and to put up with some of those kind of little kinks that we've had to work out. So thank you. I do want to go over just a couple of things that you talked about from my notes. And maybe Carrie, you could address this. One of the things that, some of the questions that we've gotten in where there seems to be a lot of concern is surrounding the PPP and the availability of funds and how long those funds will last. And there does seem to be some indication out there, whether it's rumor or whatever, that these funds are going quickly and that there isn't much left. Can you address that?
Sure. I'll attempt or relay what we've been told. Going into, like I mentioned earlier, the program went live on April 3rd. And a lot of banks were queuing up applications. So come April 3rd, there were a bunch of applications in the hopper, normally that you would see on a daily basis. So there was a big rush up towards funds on Friday. And if you take that number, and I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but if you take that initial rush of funds on Friday and divide it into the 354 billion, our analyst is saying we have about 100 days left if we were to be taking down that large amount that we did that first day, which 7 days a week, which really isn't that, probably likely. But given kind of the highest numbers, we could burn through it in 100 days. So, but again, that's coming from an analyst, and I have not documented or supported that information, but that's what I've been told.
So the only thing that I would add to that is there was, I believe it was, trying to find it on my phone here to forward it to Dana, but there was a release this morning where the Secretary of Treasury announced that we're going to ask Congress for another, I believe, 200 billion to be able to add to the program. I don't know where they're at on that, but I'll try to forward that to you, Dana, so you have that. But that was announced, I believe, early this morning.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so another question that we have in is, and I think that you may have answered it, but just for clarification's sake, is it possible that you can qualify for all three of the programs that you talked about? Is there preferential to one program over another? If you apply for one, does it negate your possibility or make it less likely that you would receive funds from another?
So it's not a clear-cut answer. We're approaching it that the programs are mutually exclusive. You can apply for an EIDL loan. And if you then choose to apply for a PPP loan, to the extent your EIDL loan was used for payroll costs, you basically have to refinance that EIDL loan into the PPP. You can't carry both. There's in the interim rules set out by SBA, it does say if you have an EIDL loan and you didn't use it to pay payroll, it's possible you can have a PPP bid. That one's just too gray of an area for me. So we're just proceeding under the understanding that we don't want the EIDL, we just want the PPP. We have the EIDL, we would roll it into the PPP. And then going back to the employee retention tax credit, both the PPP program and the tax credit program are pretty clear that you can't get the tax if you have a small business loan. And the small business loan says you can't get forgiveness if you have a tax credit under this program. So there is an interplay between them. I can't sit here today and tell you exactly where those lines are drawn. But there is some, I'm pretty confident you can't get all three. You can try, but, and that's why really at Ball Ventures, we did look at all of the options, and for us, it made sense to focus on the payroll protection program, but that may not be the case with other entities.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, Karen asks, have you been made aware of the average period of time that it will take to get the loan once you're in the system, or the grant, whatever you've applied for?
No, we have no, Karen. We have SBA numbers from last Friday and still haven't seen loan agreements. So, from a personal experience, it's at least 4 or 5 days, but it's going to be probably 2 weeks. I believe the president wanted those funds within 3 days. To the extent we've had SBA numbers for more than 3 days, we have not seen funds, and our work to secure those funds is just starting. So I don't have an answer, but it's not as quick as everyone would hope for.
Work to secure those funds, meaning loan agreements, other documentation required by the bank.
I feel like we've secured the funds and been approved. Now we just have to go through the documentation.
Okay.
To get the funds.
Great. Okay, so just 2 final questions. First, Mike asks, if you've laid off employees, can you use the funds to bring those employees back? And when you bring them back, do you need to pay them for the time that they were laid off?
So I guess I'm going to make the assumption that that's the PPP program. And yes, the program is intended to help employers keep employees on payroll. So if you did let employees go and you bring them back, part of your forgiveness amount will actually increase because your payroll costs have increased if you've rehired employees or brought on additional employees. So the more you keep people employed, the more you pay them, the more you hire, the more that PPP loan will be forgiven. And vice versa. If you get the loan and then you start laying off people or cutting their salaries, your forgiveness amount will be reduced.
Thank you. This last question's for Courtney, and a little bit off topic, but just give you the opportunity to speak a little bit about this Crush the Curve program that you're participating in, what it means, who it impacts, what you're hoping to accomplish.
So I think we only have 2 minutes left, so I'll hurry. As I mentioned before, one of our goals at Ball Ventures is to give back, to share, to be a leader, not a follower, to try to help Idaho, overcome this challenge. And really, Crush the Curve Idaho was really, the idea was out of Utah. So I'd encourage you to look at their website as well. It's really to support our communities, protect our communities, and get people back to work. From a high level, oftentimes industry is able to move a little bit quicker than government. There's certainly, we got a little more freedom. Ball Ventures, along with BVA Development, we own a large medical practice over in Boise. And as a part of that, I think we have a little bit of expertise, what goes into the logistics, all of the work that goes into testing. And with Tommy Alquist and myself, we thought of, okay, well, how can we make a difference? That's one of, I think, of our founding principles, is how do we make a difference in getting people back to work. We pulled a consortium of other businesses across the state and had an overwhelming support among those CEOs, and took Utah's model. And so how do we implement that? And phase 1 really of the implementation is what now, and I'd encourage everybody to visit the website, crushthecurveidaho.com. And it's intended to really be available for employers, healthcare workers, give employers a place to go. And when I say employers, critical employers. Great example is there's a large convenience store operator. It would not be a fun place if the world existed without convenience stores and fuel. So a lot of their workers are essential. So where do they go? So they're checking for temperatures. They're trying to screen. They're doing everything right. But if they have a temperature, what happens? Because possibly on the CDC's website, the qualifying factors there, maybe that employee doesn't qualify. So where does that employee go? The idea in phase 1 is to provide a venue for those folks to get tested, and then really, our focus, and in stage 2 is really how do we do the antibody testing when that comes out and is approved, and really step 3 is the analytics. How do we then trace that across the state? And of course, the tracing is done by the state, but it's really driven by business. It's really our way to protect the community and get Idahoans back to work. We've got partners across the state. We really went live yesterday and announced it at 4 p.m. There's a call center that's on the website that you can go, and you take the test, you get put in the queue of the call center and receive a call back. But hopefully it's step 1 of many steps. And, I've got to really give a big shout out to the governor and his staff and leadership. Really have seen him, step up over time and embrace this. And I can only imagine what his day is like. And just want to give those guys a big shout out as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And a big thank you to both Carrie and to Courtney. Thank you for being willing to share the information and the lessons that you have learned. We really appreciate that. Appreciate your time with us this afternoon. I just want to reiterate that if you want information that they shared today, the slides are available in the presentation. The SBA website is a good resource. The U.S. Chamber and the Treasury.gov, also excellent resources. This luncheon series, this luncheon, continues next week with Mayor Casper. She will be here to do a presentation on Idaho Falls and some of the challenges that they're facing with COVID-19 and future programs. So we hope you'll tune in then. Thank you so much to everyone. And again, thank you, IE Productions, for pulling this together.
Thank you.
Thank you.